Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to the Engage podcast. And Peter and myself are back in the wonderful surroundings of Christchurch, Haywards Heath. Peter, it's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you too. It feels quite familiar here now.
Oh, well, not only that, but in the last couple of months, because of the office being closed, thank you again to all of you who supported our office projects. The plans are working out very well, praise God, and we hope to have a wonderful space that we can film in just after Easter or there or thereabouts. But we have been here a lot, haven't we? And not only that, I decided to come down on Sunday and preach here.
Yes, of course,
in the evening. I was invited. It wasn't like I just kind of unilaterally turned up and went, I'm the co-host of the Engaged podcast. No. I demand access to your pulpit.
Not a spur of the moment.
I do that at other churches, but not this one. I have too much respect for this
that's
one.
Good.
So as I was driving, doing that journey, I thought, gosh, I don't think I need my phone anymore. I think I just know the way.
We know where to go, don't we?
Yeah. But we are here, and it's amazing sometimes the timing of when we do these podcasts, because we happen to be doing this on a Friday.
Yeah.
But we could not have planned this better if we had tried, because of course it is the morning after the night before.
Indeed.
And we thought we would start by talking about the by-election result.
Yeah.
Now I always get the two muddled up, which one comes first, but it's the Gorton and Denton by-election.
Denton, yeah.
Gorton and Denton by-election.
Yeah.
And I have tried all manner of combinations on that, as I've just evidenced. Normally putting Denton first and then Gorton.
Yeah,
because alphabetically,
that would
just
make
how
sense.
my mind works.
Yeah.
So what we thought we'd do is we talk about the result, and then we talk a bit about the campaign that preceded it. First, the result then. Do you want to just talk us through what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the big headlines are a more comfortable than expected victory for the Green Party and for their candidate Hannah Spencer, who is a plumber from Manchester, the area.
She had to apologise to her clients who'd booked in work over the coming months.
Oh, did she? I hadn't picked that up.
Jokingly said she might be a bit busy, going to Parliament.
Yeah.
I thought it was a nice touch.
Which is a decent excuse, isn't it? So the Greens in first, Reform in second, and Labour in third. And now it was expected that it would be a three-way horse between those three parties. Yes. I don't think anyone really expected the Conservatives or the Lib Dems or anyone else to do anything.
That's a really important point. The Prime Minister himself went up to Gorton and Denton. It is Gorton Denton, isn't it? Yeah, to Gorton and Denton just last week, and signalled at the time the mood music was Labour in with a shout here.
Well, yeah, so everyone was expecting it to be much closer.
Yes.
Just to give you a voting breakdown.
Please do.
The Greens ended on about 41%, Reform on 29%, and Labour on 25%. And everyone had been sort of expecting that Greens, Reform, Labour would all get about 30%. So it is a surprise, I think, for the Greens to win that so comfortably. Yeah. I guess there's a few big stories which emerge out of that, and we can kind of work through these in turn. But let me sketch out three big narratives. Okay. So the first would be the rise of the Green Party. So we've talked quite a lot about the rise of Reform on the right on the Engage podcast in recent months. We haven't focused quite as much on the rise of the Greens on the left, but this has been sort of a consequence of the direction Keir Starmer has taken the Labour Party in, hasn't it? Where Labour has governed more from the centre. They've been seen to be aping a little bit of the language or the policies of Reform to try and bring back some of the working class vote. The Greens are much further to the left, and this has shown that there is an appetite in certain parts of the country for that kind of politics. So the rise of the Green Party is one narrative, and we will come on to that. The next narrative, I think, for you is the really precarious position which the Prime Minister is in. And I know we have talked about that as well on our last couple of podcasts, but Keir Starmer is now in serious trouble. So generally you only want to associate yourself with a by-election result if you think you're going to win.
Yeah.
And I think both the Greens and Reform were quite clear in their campaigning that they were seeing this as almost like a referendum on Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. And so they have shown that Keir Starmer is not popular. He now, I think, his support really is ebbing away. And then the third narrative, just to kind of keep it going again as well, because we have talked about it a little bit before, is Reform having this pretty strong base now and the real death of the kind of two-party system of Labour and the Conservatives. Yeah. So even in areas where you wouldn't necessarily expect Reform to have much of a vote share, they are polling almost 30%. So there's three big things,
narratives.
Three big stories for us to get into just from the results. So why don't we start with the Green Party?
All right.
What do you make of their success?
Well, what I want to do actually, Peter, and I'm going to surprise you here. I want to diagonalize.
Very good.
Okay, I want to adopt the approach taken by people like Chris Watkins, Tim Keller, Dan Strange as well. And I want to basically say, what about the Green Party political agenda with its young, trendy, eco-popularist leader, Zach Polanski, and this new MP, the first by-election the Green Party have ever won,
Indeed.
Hannah Spencer. What about their agenda, which you described as very left-wing, can we connect with as Christians? And what would we probably choose to challenge with varying degrees depending on your political allegiance?
Well, why don't we just explain just fully for anyone who hasn't heard that term diagonalization, quite what it means, and also sort of where it comes from. I guess there are lots of political ideologies out there, and we believe, don't we, that all humans are made in the image of God, and so therefore we all have got that imprint from God. In us, we all are beneficiaries of his common grace as well. And so that would mean that as humans, we would think, hopefully, that we ought to be able to find some good things which are there in most ideologies. However, we also know that we are fallen people and we get lots of things wrong. So we would also expect there to be lots of bad things in the ideologies too. And so diagonalization is an attempt to look at what we can affirm, but also what we should critique, and effectively to let the Bible shape the agenda rather than any one political philosophy.
And to add to that, this is not. It sounds very simple. It's not simple, because you are inevitably trying to read across from an ancient text to modern day. You are trying to assess and guess at things like motive and motives of the heart, which are notoriously difficult to be too dogmatic about, because the Lord alone knows the heart. But we can still make some judgments, and we should. And I also think that your own politics comes into play here, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we're seeing that. And I think play out on X, for example, there's been some spats between Christians on X because some are very pleased at this result, or at least affirming of it. And then others are saying, well, would you have said the same? If Reform won, for example, why are you always dumping on Reform? And I think maybe we would be helped if we all stop trying to pretend that we're all politically neutral. I alone am politically neutral, a floating voter. And we're more honest about our own convictions, because that does shape how well you're able to diagonalize different candidates.
That's a really helpful point, I think. So none of us start from a neutral point of view, and it is really easy to conflate my own personal preference with what the Bible is saying.
So a good example, find something in the Green Party agenda that I can affirm. So here's one that I'm going to throw out there, and then I think it's a good case study. In her messaging, Hannah Spencer talked about the fact that she wanted to try a new politics that stood against the politics of tribalism, of dividing us into us and them. She talked about how Muslims who voted for her are the same as us because they are human. Now, when I read that, when I hear that, I want to be able to affirm something in that, because that is Genesis 1,
absolutely,
there. I think what makes it more complicated is the Green Party, and this does get into the campaign a little bit. They ran a campaign where they were very deliberately targeting the Muslim vote, because they knew the Muslim vote is very pro-Gaza. And so therefore they were more likely to row in behind the Green Party, thereby damaging the Labour Party's chances. Now, if you are deliberately targeting the Muslim vote, then you are going to say things like, Muslims are people too. It speaks perhaps to just how divided we've become, that you even need to say that. It shouldn't be a controversial thing to say, by the way, our Muslim neighbours are made in God's image, are fellow image bearers. We should love them as we love ourselves. But even that language is seen as polarising. So immediately I want to connect. But I also want to challenge it a bit as well, because when we think about our country, Kemi Badenoch used this line in her response. She said that she's always said, that we are a multi-ethnic country, not a sort of multicultural country. In other words, there is such a thing as a British culture, and people who come here that we welcome, that we love, that we do expect, and we do want to see some evidence that they are conforming to British culture rather than running and living out their own parallel culture.
Yeah.
So I give that as an example of, like, on the surface level, it seems very simple. Actually, when you press into it, it becomes more complicated.
Yeah, and there would be various things which we can diagonalise within the Greens and indeed any other party. So to give you a couple of sort of big picture examples, so not necessarily focused on this campaign. Obviously, the Greens have made their name by virtue of caring a lot about the environment. And as Christians, we believe, don't we, that the environment is something which we ought to care about because we have been created by God to be stewards of the earth and to reflect God's loving rule of the world around us. And so we do believe that Christians should care about the environment. However, we don't believe that the environment takes precedence over humans.
Or at least we shouldn't.
Yes, because humans are made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And so the heavens might declare the glory of God, but it's only humans who are made in his image.
Yes.
And so that means that when it comes to particular policy things, say questions around net zero, that there's a more nuanced debate to be had than just climate.
And that's really helpful. Let me paint another example. Let's say the Greens policy of high taxation, and of the state being very interventionist, redistribution of wealth. Now, these are classic socialist economic policies. Some Christians may be able to connect with them, at least in some level, out of a belief that the Bible is full of texts that talk about God hates dishonest scales. God hates it when the rich hoard money.
Absolutely.
James 5 is a excoriating criticism of rich people who fail even to pay their workers their fair wages. And the text says that the cries of the workers, we don't know if they were Christian or not, the cries of the workers goes up to the Lord Almighty who hears them because the Lord is on their side. So I want to connect on that level. At the same time, I'm going to put my political cards on the table for the first time ever on the Engage podcast. So prepare for this shock. I would instinctively veer towards a centre-right position, particularly on economics. I don't believe the state is best placed to serve our economic interests. I want to see less regulation. I want to see lower taxes. I want to see entrepreneurship. I want to see businesses thriving. I also want to see the state intervening to uphold as ethical a form of capitalism as we possibly can, and all that means. So therefore, I don't agree with the Greens' left-wing agenda, but another Christian who doesn't share my politics as closely as I know you do, they would connect with that, whereas I would probably veer more on the challenge. So two Christians can connect and challenge in two quite different ways. And one of the things we've got to work harder at as the church, I think, is working together on left and right, centre left, centre right. What are the kind of non-negotiables that we all must affirm? And you just gave us one. We must affirm creation care. And from an economic point of view, we must affirm that it is wrong and it is evil when all the money is hoarded by the wealthy 1% and none makes its way to those who are genuinely economically, socially deprived and poor. That was beautiful. Sorry, I was quite moved myself there. But it's true, isn't it? Like, it's an example of how diagonalization is a really important discipline, but you have to practice it.
Yeah, you do, and you have to work really hard, I think, to let the Bible genuinely be shaping the agenda and be applying the same standards to all the parties as opposed to just one.
Yes.
And obviously, what we're looking at here in particular is the Green Party, but we could be performing a very similar exercise for the Conservatives or the Labour Party or Reform.
And the other aspect, I suppose, of diagonalization is we're not saying practice diagonalization purely on the policies alone, but don't forget the importance of individual character as well.
Oh, yeah.
And I say that only because that adds another layer to this. You know, more and more I think that it's very easy, perhaps even for someone like myself, I'm interested in politics, to give the impression that when it comes to voting, when it comes to policies, you know, I alone, along with those other Christians who are interested, are capable of thinking about this really, really well. And actually, while I do think my job has its advantages when it comes to an election or a by-election even, and analysing it, at the same time, I want to recognise that this is not always easy and straightforward.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with diagonalization, and I really like it as a model, but I think it is easier to do around philosophies than it is around policies.
Yes, I think that's a very good point.
So I find it much easier to diagonalize around kind of policies, around a philosophy around the economy.
Yes.
Because a policy will have a real world outcome.
Yes.
And outcomes don't necessarily always go the way you want them to.
No, that's true.
So just to give you an example, you've spoken there passionately about the importance, quite rightly, about wealth not being hoarded just by the rich. And that's a really good principle. And I'm thoroughly in support of that. And yet we also know that since Labour came into power a couple of years ago, we've had an exodus of millionaires and billionaires leaving the country, and less wealth around. Then taxes are going up, and there's always that famous Margaret Thatcher quote about socialism. The problem with socialism is eventually you always run out of other people's money.
Yes.
And so I might, in theory, quite like the philosophy of wealth being shared around a bit more fairly, but I've got to see whether it's also going to produce the outcome. Or is it all just kind of pie in the sky?
And none of this, by the way, I think is to suggest for a moment that what you're really trying to do is just grab hold of a couple of kind of token positives and then move on to all the things you don't like. Diagonalization, when it's done credibly and well, is I think, spiritually mature, appropriate way of humbly recognizing that I, as an individual, don't have all the answers. That, as you said, I want God's word to shape my politics more than anything else. Just coming back to the Green Party, I think one of the things I find that distresses me is there are a number of social policies that they hold to as a party, including the decriminalization of drugs, for example, a very liberal position on abortion. I don't know if this is official party policy. I think it probably is. Pro-assisted suicide. And I think the other thing I find kind of disturbing is the position they've consistently taken on the transgender question. Now, I have tried on this podcast to demonstrate here a willingness to affirm what I can affirm. And all too often, it seems to me, in the public discourse between Christians, Christians who align themselves more on the left will welcome the result that's just happened and say next to nothing about those social policies. Those who align themselves more on the right, sometimes it seems to me, only speak about those social policies without recognizing that there is a bigger picture that, hey, do you know what? The Greens have played a role in changing the political agenda on the environment. Now, you may say wholly for the bad, but I think they've mainstreamized concern about the climate. They've contributed to that. So that's why we've started the way we have, to try to show this is not just me and you, two people who have similar politics, just going to absolutely tear our hair out, freaking out, thinking this is a disaster. We've tried to, in good faith, start by saying, hold on a minute, are there things we can affirm? But I think that's not to minimize or downplay, because when we were in the car on the way down, by the way, dear watchers, Peter and I, we traveled down in the car and we talk, just want you to know this, about the podcast we're about to do. We begin to sort of shape it in the car. And, you were weeping, weren't you?
No, I wasn't at that point, but I was probably more outspoken than I would normally be.
So let's talk about what is it about this result that particularly concerns you?
I find the Green Party personally quite concerning on a whole load of levels. And I do want to preface this also by saying someone on the left might find an equivalent result on the right very concerning as well. And so I do completely get that. I think the Greens' economic plans are essentially a fantasy. I think we've already seen in the last couple of years that Labour have struggled on the economy, and that's not governing from that far on the left at all. The Greens are far more left-wing than they are. I think their plans around immigration are utterly out of touch with where the country is at. I did some research on the Greens when we were doing our quiz for the 24 election. And I essentially read through basically their entire website of things they believed. And some of this now isn't on their website anymore, but I don't think I think they probably still believe it, they just don't want to say it so openly. Where effectively they were talking about a world without borders. It's like, that is just, again, that is unworkable. And I don't actually even believe that is biblical, to be honest. I know that the migration debate is very different. It's very different today to the migration, to the questions around migration in an agrarian society 3,000 years ago. But even within that world, you had things like boundary stones, or you have the example where Moses has to ask a tribe whether he can go through their land, and they say no, and he accepts it.
Even more explicit, when Paul's in the Areopagus in Athens, he's very clear God has
set boundaries
for the nations. He appoints them. So I think to say, you're absolutely right. That's a good example of a borderless world is not just bad policy, but also unbiblical.
I think it is. And then that's before you even get onto some of the actual social issues, and you've mentioned some of them already, but we have sort of seen how even when the Greens are a junior party in a coalition up in Scotland, the impact that had on, say, the gender debate, where they essentially kind of held the SNP to ransom to try and push through self-identification,
gender reform
for transgender
and actually Humza Yousaf, the man who succeeded Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, I wrote a piece, this is in preparation for our election site that we're launching for the Scottish and Welsh elections. I wrote a piece about the Bedlam in Bute House. And my point was that actually both Humza and Nicola, they were brought down on the gender issue. Because in Humza's case, the Greens left the government in part because of how the Scottish government reacted to the Hillary Cass review, which was the review of gender identity services for children, particularly in England. And so that to me is something that I think all Christians, whether you're left or whether you're right, should be public in saying, I have real concerns about this. And what I find is getting to me more and more, maybe I'm just getting older, is that why is it on issues like abortion, why are they seen as a right-wing issue? Why is it social conservatives who are the ones who speak out about that? When abortion, the taking of arguably the most vulnerable of us all, the taking of life is not a right-wing or a left-wing issue.
And I think let's be under no illusions here. So the Cass review has dramatically altered the landscape in the gender debate in the UK, where now the Labour Party are following its recommendations. In a hypothetical world where the Greens were the largest party in the UK, I firmly don't believe they would be doing the same thing. I think they would be trying to get a new piece of research commissioned, and they'd be trying to overturn it because they don't believe it. So I do find them really concerning on a policy level, and that's before you even get to some of the ways in which they've done politics and indeed the characters. So you've got Zach Polanski as the leader of the Green Party, who's a very good communicator, really good online, kind of gets how to speak to young people. This is the same Zach Polanski who, of course, was in fact trying to become a Lib Dem MP less than 10 years ago. The same Zach Polanski who made his career sort of a bit of a hypnotist with some questionable claims. You've then got his the deputy leader of the Green Party who tweets their support for Hamas within hours of Hamas butchering people in Israel on the October the 7th attacks a couple of years ago. This is and there is such. I find it really. I know that the war in the Middle East raises temperatures a lot, and it's very hard to have a nuanced discussion about it. And I am not at all saying that criticism of what the Israeli government is always invalid. But the way in which the Green Party speaks on it, I struggle not to see as really pretty anti-Semitic.
And that's been a long-standing concern, not just in the Green Party, but Jeremy Corbyn, the far left of the Labour Party. And actually, it strikes me that one of the really concerning elements of all of this is, from my perspective, a Green Party down here in some kind of coalition in the future is very, very disturbing because of the positions they take on these issues. And yet we know from polling that young people, young voters, new voters, flock to parties like the Greens, but also they are drawn to the kind of more radical left-wing politics of Jeremy Corbyn, who, after all, has not actually gone away.
No,
has
he
just
hasn't,
been voted in as leader of the new party.
Your party.
Your party. And it seems to me that populist agenda that he ran on in 2017, where they just decided to go for it and be honest about what they wanted, it did generate quite a lot of support among younger voters. And of course, increasingly, as we move through the years, they're going to become the kind of the main voting bloc. And so what does that mean for our politics? It means a more fractured politics, a more divisive politics, and as you alluded to earlier, the end of the two-party system.
Yeah, I mean, the words you quoted from the Green candidate, whose name I've already forgotten.
Who won? Hannah Spencer.
That's it, Hannah Spencer. About trying to end politics of division.
Yes.
The Greens are not a party who will be doing that at all. No. So I don't. Did you see the story doing the rounds a couple of weeks ago? I think this is from Bristol, where Carla Denier is the MP, who's Green. Where essentially there were campaigners going around knocking on doors, encouraging people to boycott any products which had any link with Israel at all.
I hadn't seen that.
And then sort of making notes potentially on people who disagreed with them.
Yeah.
And you think...
It's quite totalitarian, isn't it?
Well, it's more than... It is more than that. That is like actually borderline getting close to what the Nazis were doing in terms of actually boycotting a Jewish business.
And to switch tacks somewhat sharply, but still in connection with this by-election, I think it'd be remiss of us not to acknowledge that post the result, Reform have said they will launch a legal challenge over the vote.
Yeah.
Because of concerns about what's called family voting. So I wonder if I just quickly unpack this and explain what happened. So the Electoral Commission, which oversees all our elections, they give democracy volunteers access to polling stations at election time. So democracy volunteers deployed 4 accredited election observers across the Gorton and Denton Westminster parliamentary by-election. And the team attended 22 of the 45 polling stations in the constituency, and they spent between 30 and 45 minutes in each. They worked in pairs using the international standard for electoral observation, the 4I principle. Staff were welcomed to the team, were welcoming to the team, and the team assessed 2 significant aspects of electoral integrity: family voting, where 2 voters either confer, collude, or direct each other on voting, which breaches the secret ballot. The team also assessed the impact of the requirement for voters to show ID before they're issued with a ballot paper. And the legislation behind this in 2023 was the enactment of the Ballot Secrecy Act, which made the practice of family voting more clearly a breach of the secret ballot, making it more enforceable by staff and polling stations. Signage is now available to discourage the practice. Signage was only seen in 45% of the polling stations observed. And the observer team saw family voting in 15 of the 22 polling stations observed, some 32 cases in total, 9 cases in one polling station alone. The team observed a sample of 545 voters casting their votes, meaning 12% of those voters observed either caused or were affected by family voting. And this is what the director of Democracy Volunteers, John Alt, said. Today, we've seen concerningly high levels of family voting in Gorton and Denton. Based on our assessment of today's observations, we have seen the highest levels of family voting at any election in our 10-year history of observing elections in the UK. We rarely report an issue on the night of an election, but the data we've collected today on family voting, when compared to other recent by-elections, is extremely high. Yeah. Also, the team saw a number of voters taking photographs of their ballot papers. One voter was authorised to vote despite them having already marked as voted earlier, which is very concerning. Voters were turned away as well. In each case, this was due to them not being registered voter for the Westminster elections, such as having EU citizenship, and only being allowed to vote in local elections. So all of this, it can sound like Trumpian scare tactics of, my election was stolen and all of that kind of thing. But I would argue, this is from mainstream media, this is from Sky News, and I would argue this is mainstream media saying, hold on, there's a story here around potential voter irregularities, possibly fraud, and illegal activity that's taken place at the election.
Yeah, and I think just to explain for anyone who is not necessarily reading between the lines on this. So something which we haven't yet talked about is in either Gorton or Denton, and I can't remember which one it is. There's a very strong percentage of Muslim people. In the other one, there's a very strong percentage of white working class people, and so the election was sort of seen as effectively as a question of which is going to come out on top. But essentially, the fears here, and this was reflected, I think, by some people on the doorsteps who were going around canvassing, was that within particularly the Muslim community, women were not necessarily feeling like they had their own voice. They were more being told by their husbands, "This is how you need to vote." So that is the subtext to what James has read out there. I certainly think that we need to be. I mean, this by-election has certainly kind of revealed the increasing importance which religion is playing within our elections, and that's not just from a Muslim point of view, because you've also got the co-opting of Christian language by Reform on the right as well, which is an interesting story.
Yes,
but this is sort of reflective of a trend which we saw in the 2024 election.
Yes,
where we had I think at that point it was 5 independent Muslim MPs.
Yeah.
Who were not necessarily expected to win, but effectively there was always talk about the Muslim vote coming out en masse because they were frustrated with the Labour Party's position over Israel and Gaza.
What you're really talking about is this by-election has revealed tactical voting, perhaps on a scale that we've not really seen before, but it sets up where I think we're going for the next general election, which is the Conservative Party got just 2% of the vote. The Labour Party came third. They've not come third in a by-election for a very, very, very long time. And the reality is that the two-party system, evidenced by this election, is gone. It's not just that it's going, it has gone.
Oh, it absolutely has.
2 non-big mainstream parties.
Getting almost 70% of the vote.
Getting almost 70% of the vote. And tactical voting will then become significant, because what will happen is those on the left will potentially coalesce around who do we vote for to ensure that we don't have a Reform candidate in. On the other side is who do we vote for to ensure that we do have a Reform candidate in. And I think, the old alliances and the old allegiances, they're not the same anymore.
No, I feel like I'm uttering a line from The Lord of the Rings. The old alliances are dead.
I think that is a line.
It is, yeah.
From King Theoden.
Absolutely. Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep, yeah. Helm 2. Yeah. About an hour and 45 minutes and 30 seconds in.
Very good.
Yeah,
we'll check that one afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is certainly true. So I think it was 2019, wasn't it, when Farage stood down the Brexit party from Conservative seats so that Boris could kind of get his majority.
Yes.
And then Farage was not very happy with not being thanked after that.
Well, there is a line of thought that says if he was put in the House of Lords at that point, then the rise of Reform would never have happened. He would have been happy, he would have been content. I'm not sure if that is true.
I don't know. I think the Conservatives then governed from such a non-Conservative position. You'd always have had the disaffection with how they're done.
I think then, on reflection, I think that sectarian voting...
I think sectarian voting is a massive thing.
...is a trend that is now being seen far more clearly here.
Yeah.
I think friends in Northern Ireland could perhaps help us understand what that is like to live with that, because that seems to be a feature that will stay. We know that there are several high prominent Labour MPs who have wafer thin majorities, like Wes Streeting, and he is worried, according to the text messages he sent, WhatsApps he sent to Peter Mandelson, about the Muslim vote and what it will do to him at the next election.
Well, yeah, so for context, I think his majority is about 500 or so?
About 528, I think, to be precise. But I also think you're right. I think the challenge of Reform for the Christian church is that many will, I suspect, end up voting, not all, but many, certainly from the evangelical wing of the church, will vote for them perhaps holding their nose because they look at people like James Orr, head of policy, Danny Kruger, head of preparing for government, and they will start to hear language that they can connect with.
Yeah.
Because talking, as Danny did this week, about the fact the sexual revolution has gone too far. I mean, if you look at the number of abortions that are happening in our country, in each quarter, it's getting higher and higher and higher, more than 10 million since 1967, then I don't see anyone who believes that sex is good, a gift from God, and all that the Bible teaches us about that, and the value of life, can't see that and think the sexual revolution absolutely has gone too far. When was the last time you heard a conservative politician talk about that? When was the last time you heard a Labour politician stand up and say, actually, the sexual revolution has gone too far, and for the sake of future generations, we need to change how we approach these things.
Yeah.
So I think Christians will gravitate towards the voice that they can connect with the most, and who am I to judge them for that?
Yeah, I don't think it's an easy position for Christians to be in.
No, I agree.
And like as we were talking about before with diagonalization, we know that no party ever truly reflects God's heart. And I think some of us are quite wary of the Christian language, which is, and I'm using the word
100%.
co-opted quite deliberately, because not all those who are using it believe it. So Matt Goodwin, who was a Reform candidate for Gorton and Denton, was using a lot of Christian values kind of language. It was interesting. Zia Yusuf, who is a Muslim himself, was using the kind of Christian heritage language when kind of campaigning for reform. Yeah. So, I think co-opting is the right word. Ultimately, part of this might come down, and I really hate kind of thinking like this because I don't want to think like it, but part of it might come down to what outcome we think is going to end up being best.
And this sort of takes us into things we've talked about before around what are the right motivations when it comes to voting.
Yeah.
The other thing we haven't talked about is the launch of Restore.
Is this Rupert Lowe's one?
Rupert Lowe's outfit.
Yeah, I'm less worried about that one.
Membership soar quite spectacularly in the early weeks, and it's very interesting to me that surely they are explicit. They will repeal abortion decriminalization. They'll repeal assisted suicide. I can see a lot of young Christian men especially flocking to Restore. I've been struck by the fact that there have been defections from the Reform movement to Restore. It's very confusing, isn't it? Reform, Restore already. And the fact they're polling 7% already is interesting. That speaks to the fragmentation of voting intentions in our country. So I actually think that they're one to watch, if nothing else, because they further split the right-wing vote in our country.
Well, I think the other fascinating thing with that one is, in some ways, it is a symptom of the fact that Farage seemingly cannot really control his party.
Yeah.
So he had Rupert Lowe as one of only 5 MPs at the start. And it was 5 at the start, I think.
Yes,
I found it so difficult because they keep on losing some and getting some back.
Yeah.
But they then fell out, and so Rupert Lowe left. Or similarly, you had someone like Ben Habib, who was kind of major within Reform, has also left, and James McMurdoch as well was one of their original MPs. So obviously all parties have their problems with party discipline, but you would back a party which only has 5 MPs to do a better job of it than one with 300.
Well, absolutely.
And they've really struggled with that.
I wonder whether, I mean, we do want to talk about another topic on this podcast as well, and I wonder whether we need to pivot.
Yeah, I feel like we've had so much fun talking about the by-election.
Why don't I just helpful as an encouragement, as an exhortation for all of us as we contemplate the result, as we think about the future, where Paul's words in Philippians 4, verse 8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Which is beautiful words in the context of an increasingly divided country. And that is not to suggest or imply that we should sort of withdraw, not engage, or any of that. But it gives us a clear instruction that actually there are still good things in our world, gifts of God's common grace that we can celebrate, that we can enjoy, that we can think about, as much as anything else, to stop us becoming too cynical and to stop us becoming too depressed. And I think if we practice this more on social media, I think, again, not to come back to it, but the saddest thing is often it is Christian on Christian that is the worst kind of social media interactions.
Yeah.
You know, language like, what is even the point of view? It is just not acceptable. Even if I agree with what you're saying, why are we talking to brothers in Christ like that? It's so sad.
Well, it's not truth and grace. It's not speech which is seasoned with salt.
And that's not to judge,
not a Christian way of speaking.
Because I've spoken strongly on social media before, but when I see it, and I've seen it more and more in recent times, because I think what's happening is I think fear is getting a grip of people's hearts. And they're speaking and they're tweeting and they're social mediaizing out of fear. And I remember the words that John taught us, that perfect love drives out fear. That brother or sister who has very, very different politics to you is first and foremost someone that you should love in Christ because Christ died for them. That should change how we speak and think.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We wanted to pivot and talk briefly about the assisted suicide bill.
Yes.
Now, we've spoken about this before on this podcast, and I think it's a really fascinating thing. Where we are is the bill is in the House of Lords, and it's been bogged down in committee for a number of weeks, a number of months actually, with more than 1,000 amendments having been tabled to the bill, and lots of chatter in the media about the fact that a small number of peers, probably religious, are filibustering this bill. And the big development this week is that the government have refused to give the bill any more time. They previously added in an extra 10 sitting Fridays, so they did give some time, extra time for it, but they've said no more. And Parliament in the Lords will go into recess at the end of March. It will come back on the 12th of April. But it will then go off again because it will be prorogued for a King's speech probably middle of May after the local elections, which means the bill still has to finish committee stage, then go through report, then do a third reading. The Commons have to approve every single one of the Lords' amendments that have been passed, so it would go back to the Commons. It then goes into ping pong because if the Lords disagree with the Commons taking out an amendment, it goes back and forth, and only when both houses are agreed on the final version does it go for royal assent. In other words, there is not enough time left for this bill to pass.
Almost certainly, yeah.
So, yes, almost certainly. So, this is, I think, a truly extraordinary result. From my perspective, an absolutely outstanding one. I had assumed at the beginning of this that this would become law because the Commons finally voted for it, never done that before. And the House of Lords in the past has been notoriously inclined to be quite supportive, apart from some strong allies who were always against. But what genuinely seems to have happened is the House of Lords, which is not under an obligation to support this because it's not a government bill, it's not a manifesto bill, it is a private member's bill. They've actually done their job.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's worth saying that part of the reason why there are so many amendments is because the bill was really, really flawed.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of spin out there in the media currently suggesting that this is just a handful of peers, as you said, who are trying to waste time. The issue is that people are trying to improve the bill because the bill has so many problems with it.
Yes.
And one of the ironies, of course, of all this is that the sponsor of the bill in the Lords, Lord Falconer, has himself tabled 69 amendments.
In recognition of how flawed it is.
And so if every member of the House of Lords put forward the same amount of amendments, there would be over 58,000 amendments.
Exactly,
so you can't possibly say this is just a handful of religious people.
This is not unprecedented. This number of amendments has gone down to previous bills. It reflects the gravity of the issue that's at stake. Legalizing assisted suicide would be crossing a Rubicon in our country for the first time. The evidence from around the world is overwhelmingly clear. The criteria would be expanded over time. The numbers would increase. And more than that, I think what we have always said at CARE is that this is not the right answer to the right question. The right question is, how do we best care for people who are sick, suffering, and dying?
Yeah.
The answer is to make sure that palliative care is available in every corner of this country.
Yeah.
So what I would like to see is to seize this moment where we've just spent the last 2 years debating end-of-life care. I want to see the government publish their palliative care strategy, and I want to see the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, out in public visiting hospices and making sure that in the next spring statement that's coming up, there is a financial settlement that sees far more money being diverted to palliative care.
Yeah.
And we better do that, because if we don't, hospices will close. But more than that, if assisted suicide is ever legalized in this country, it will be the provision of palliative care that suffers, because that's what we see elsewhere. So I think this is a really good result. The one extra thing I would say is we need to keep praying that the bill in Scotland will fall. They're going to vote on that in March. That's the final vote. And the other thing I would say is that from our perspective, we might have won this battle, but the war carries on.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, I mean, the talk is that if the bill does fail, well then, obviously, MPs can put in their name to go into the private members' ballot.
Yeah.
Apparently, around 50 have suggested that they would be willing to
take on this issue.
Effectively, essentially, yes, to bring this issue back again. So there is a relatively strong chance that this will be debated again within this parliament.
The only thing I would say to that, and you're absolutely right, I mean, that colleague of mine, he worked out the odds that based on the number of very, very pro MPs, that there's a 44% chance
they'll be in the top 5.
Be in top 5. And that's important. If it's not in the top 5, it's realistic that it's not going to have time again.
Yeah.
But this bill was number 1.
Yeah.
It's still run out of time, even though the government gave it extra time. And so I think we could be in a very similar position. The issue will be if the Parliament Act is exercised, then what happens is if a Spartan pro-assisted suicide MP comes in the top 5, they have to reintroduce the bill that was passed by the Commons at third reading. In other words, the legislation that the House of Lords have just spent nearly a year excoriating for being so awful, they would have to reintroduce it, have to go back through the Commons. Then it would go to the Lords, but this time the Lords would not be able to stop it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be very, very improper to use that, nearly unprecedented to use on a private member's bill.
Yeah.
I think we have to respect the fact as Christians that we live in a democracy. That means that if it comes back because an MP uses the same mechanism to try to bring it back, that is a legitimate thing to do. There is such a thing as fatigue in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The House may feel that we've debated this at considerable length. The new bill does not address all the issues. Why are we going through this all again? And I could see a scenario where, unlike the Leadbeater bill, the Commons, which only voted it through at third reading by 23 votes, goes, actually, we're not going to do this. Sorry, we're going to shut the door earlier in the process. I could see that happening. So the messaging, I think, for all of us is keep praying, praise God for this, what we think will be an amazing outcome. Feels like a stay of execution. That's a terrible line in the context.
It's ironic.
It feels like, we've won a battle, but the war carries on, and we must continue to make the positive case that in nearly every instance of pain at the end of life, palliative care is the answer. So let's make it available everywhere.
Yeah, completely.
Peter, we've talked about big stuff, heavy stuff. We've talked about lots of stuff. I feel absolutely knackered. Forgive me for my coffee during this. I've actually felt a bit unwell today, but I came here for you. I battled through the elements, driving, exhaustion, near sickness. And that's not just the pink top that Peter's wearing. That is a genuine medical ailment. But I wanted to be here. I wanted to be here with you, Peter. Because these are massive issues that we need to talk about.
Indeed.
Yeah. Great to be with you. We will be back very soon, probably recording here again.
I imagine so.
The building work is not yet finished. And until then, one more thing, do not forget, we mention this on every podcast. Later this year, we will be doing a live recording of the Engaged podcast, and we would love you to come. In fact, this live event will not really be worth the paper it's written on in terms of the plan unless some of you choose to come and meet us in person and watch us as we record. We're hoping to have some special guests, and we will release details of it later in the year with an opportunity for you to come and actually enjoy watching the Engage podcast be recorded live. So we'll say more about that soon, but I wanted to keep that on your radar. There we are, job done. Peter, a pleasure as always.
Good to see you,
Until
James.
next time, see you later.
Take care.